Okay, I'm warmed up now. I'm going to try another book tag. This is the Snob-O-Meter Tag. Original tag from That Reading Guy. I saw it on Steve Donahue's channel, and then I see a lot of people are doing it, and I've really enjoyed everyone else's, so I thought I'd give it a shot. And I'm going to try and be brutally honest. Brutally honest. This is my most honest video. If I can find the questions. The Snob-O-Meter Tag. I had some stuff I wanted to say in advance, but I guess if I remember it, I'll fill it in later. Anyway, it's 12 prompts, including tagging some people. I will try and tag some people this time because I don't think everyone who I'm friends with has seen this one yet. So definitely watch the original from That Reading Guy, and Steve Donahue's tag is... His response is very interesting. You know, it's funny, I was trying to find this again today, so I just typed in book snob, and I found hundreds of old tags from 5 years ago about a similar tag called the book snob tag or something, and all the same people did it then. So it might be, you could probably end up on a real deep dive about various long-term YouTubers different thoughts on book snobbery over the last 5, 10, 15 years. Anyway, these are excellent questions, though, so I'm going to stick with this one. Anyway, the first question is, what is your definition of book snobbery? Okay, well, that's more interesting than not as straightforward as I would have thought initially, because obviously a book snob is a person who looks down on a person who reads something that they feel is of lower quality than the person they're looking down on should have read, right? But there's also kind of a reverse snobbery too, where people reminds me, a long time ago there was an Onion that humor site, The Onion, did a funny article about, the headline was something like, sports fanatic looks down on Star Wars fanatic, or something like that. You know, people do tend to be snobs about people who read other stupid stuff. Like, you'll read people, many times you'll see people looking down on romance readers, and that same person will read like 1,000 Star Wars books, or a person who read 1,000 Star Wars books but thinks that Star Trek is childish and simplistic, you know, just nonsense like that. So there are reverse snobs too, or people that, and these people are just as annoying to me as anything else, people who only read, this happens with a lot of young sci-fi guys, you know, when I was growing up too, who just feel that anything else, any kind of quote-unquote mainstream literature is just garbage, that no one really likes it, no one would really read that. It's you know, the only true literature is science fiction. There's a lot of reverse snobbery too. So any kind of looking down on other people's reading habits, I would consider some form of snobbery. Anyway, number 2, is there a genre or type of book you would never consider reading, such as would you ever read a romance? Or if you regularly read romance, would you ever try a science fiction novel? I don't think, and here's where I pat myself on the back, and I think I'm not a snob, is I don't think there's any type of book that I would never consider reading. The closest would be a certain type of political memoir written in advance of a national political campaign, because that book is just full of empty lies. Like, for example, I read Obama's first book, Dreams of My Father, I think it was called, which he wrote before he had much plans to enter politics, when he was just trying to be a writer and other things. Or at least it was just in the back of his mind. So there's some good passages in that book. Then he wrote a book, you know, right before his election, which I didn't read. And even though I liked Bernie Sanders for a while, I would never read his pre-campaign book, because those books... So what the point I'm trying to make is, I'm not just saying I don't like those kind of books from people I'm opposed to. I just think a book that somebody's writing a couple of years on their path to the presidency is just going to be complete garbage. Ghost written, obviously, but not even that. It's just going to be just a propaganda document. And it really doesn't matter whether I would even like the politician or not, or whether I would vote for them on their policies or not, but anything like that. You know, I have read some post-presidential biographies. I think I read Clinton's. Who else did I read? Maybe that was the only one. I'd rather read, if I'm going to read political books at all, it's going to be about some insider, you know, who doesn't have a reputation to protect. I might read those. But those kind of books that is really not really a real book. It's just a tool it's just a marketing tool towards a political campaign. So that is a book I would probably never read, no matter how much I was interested in the politician. Like, for example, I might read J.D. Vance's book, Hillbilly Elegy. I almost read it a couple of years ago. I read a lot of people whose opinions I like really disliked it, but now I think I probably should read that book. Probably every American should read that book, whether you're pro or anti, you know, no matter what position on the political divide you're on, because I believe when he wrote that book, he didn't ever think he'd be vice president. So that would be worth reading, just to see what his mindset was like and how it's changed. That's probably an important political document. But if he were to publish another book, J.D. Vance, I mean, in, like, say, 2 years as he's gearing up to his own political campaign, I would not read that book, because it would just be garbage. Because here I'm getting into a political rant. All politicians are liars and schemers, and they're just trying to sell you a bill of goods. So I would think any book like that would be just self-serving. So that's probably a book that I would never waste time reading. But I'm just making the other point that I would read books by political figures, whether I like them or not, in that broader context, after their administration or whatever, or long before they were entering a campaign. Other than that, I don't think I would. You know, if something that I don't want to read, for example, you know, these romantasy books that are out right now that I don't have much interest in, I might. At a different time in my life, I would have read some anyway, just to see what the new genres are. I used to try and read urban fantasy. I tried many type of books that I don't think I would like, just, you know, if they're popular. Many times I've tried, like, high fantasy books, like, you know, post-Tolkien kind of fantasy trilogies. It's not my favorite kind of fantasy. As I've said many times on this channel, I stick to two other kinds of fantasy. You know, true class. I like the Gormenghast books. I like, but mostly what I like for my general fantasy reading, if I was going to do any, would be Sword and Sorcery. I like that much better than the band of travelers go off to throw the chalice in the Golden Gorge or whatever. Those kind of things don't appeal to me very much. But I probably wouldn't read that genre again. And I wouldn't read Sarah J. Maas or anything like that unless somebody was really adamant that, like, you're going to love this so much. Then I would read it. So I can't say that I would never consider it. Okay. Number 3, does erotica count as literature? I would say yes. I would say nothing is excluded from being literature. I'm trying to think if there is any erotic literature that might not be considered erotica now, but there was erotic at the time. Like, is Moll Flanders considered erotica or body or anything like that? I did read that book by Daniel Defoe a long time ago. I read all of Daniel Defoe. I liked him very much. I read the Journal of the Plague Year and Robinson Crusoe and Moll Flanders. I really liked, I think, Moll Flanders the most. Why would I think that's erotica, though? I think you know, books with Victorian books with the name Fanny in them, for some reason, come to mind, like Fanny Burney. But she was a writer. But Story of O would maybe be considered a classic nowadays. The Story of O. So yeah, sure, it could be. I mean, there's erotica that's just meant to titillate, but there's erotica that's meant to, yeah, of course. I mean, there's the Marquis de Sade, there's the Story of the Eye. There's a lot of books in the history of the world that are considered erotic in some sense. I don't know if they would really be erotic. But I think yes is the answer. The long, convoluted answer to that question, yes. Number 4, is it better to read classic books? Is it better to read classic books than popular bestsellers? Okay, so now we're going to get into the gritty stuff. Is it better to read classic books than popular bestsellers? As other people have said, it's very subjective. I think my top of head answer would be no, it's not better. You should read what you want to read, and I do believe you should read what you want to read. But is it better? I think the more you read, you're going to find yourself reading more broadly over time, I would hope. And you're going to find a lot of classics are classics for a reason, that there really are good books in the past. There's, as I was talking about before, about the reverse snobbery. There's a lot of people that look down on old books. I remember, I think I talked about this before on the channel too, but when I was in high school, I was reading this book, which I loved so much, this fantastic mystery. I told my parents, I'm reading the most amazing book I've ever read, and they're like, what is it? And I said, The Maltese Falcon. And both my mother and my dad burst out laughing because they could be real pricks. And I said, why? What's so funny? I thought they thought I was joking or something, that I couldn't read that because they were always on me about reading stuff that was above my level. But no, they're like, that book's old. It doesn't mean it's not good. And if you like mysteries, you want to go back and read those early Agatha Christie books. You want to go back and read those early Dashiell Hammett novels and Raymond Chandler novels. You might not ever like them as much as you like Jack Reacher, but you'd be amazed. You'd be amazed how good they are. And I want to read Maltese Falcon again soon because it's just been on my list for a while, so it's on the top of my mind. So now, maybe some people don't reconsider the Maltese Falcon a classic. Obviously, it is. The technical version of classic is really like the Greek and Roman books that survived through the Dark Ages. But we don't really use it that way anymore. Any book that's been around for 100 years, I think Maltese Falcon was 29, so that would be 95 years ago, is a classic. It's still in print, never been out of print. You should read it if you like detective novels. It's a really good book. But I'm going to read it again this year, so maybe I won't like it anymore. I'll skip that. Just stick with Jack Reacher. And if you read Jack Reacher, do you want to go back and read the Travis McGee books that inspired Lee to write the Reacher novels? According to his own word, if you read the introduction of the first Reacher novel, The Killing Floor, he talks about Travis McGee and John McDonnell a lot. I think those books are better. I think probably Lee Child thinks they're better too. Would you like them as much? I think you would like them more, but you'd have to decide. So I think you should read old books. Is it better to read classic books than popular bestsellers? It depends on how narrow you're going to be on these categories. Is a popular bestseller just the latest dumb thing, or is it a popular book over the last 10 years versus it doesn't always have to be Brad Thor versus Middlemarch. I can't really think who the popular authors are anymore because I don't know. Because I mostly look online, so I see, on Amazon I see a lot of independent authors pushed forward, and I don't really know what's going on in the real world of bestsellers anymore, because I'm into my old thing, which is mostly old books, but old genre books, old popular books. Of course, if it's a classic that you're going to find as a normal person of average education, or not a literature student or something like that, it's probably going to be a good book from the past. Homer is easy to read. He's fun to read. He or she is fun to read. the Iliad, the Odyssey. Those books stuck around for a while. There's other books from those same periods, not quite that same period, but there's other ancient books that are around. There's books from the 1900s that no one reads anymore, and there's the ones that are always reprinted because people still want to read them. Some are just pushed up by the school system, but even those, they if it's not a great thrilling story, they kind of fall by the wayside. So read both. It's not better to read classics, but it is. You're missing something if you're not, in my opinion. And again, I'm using the most broad version of classics, like old books that people liked at the time and still like and read. And I see that on Booktube all the time when somebody will pick up for during June on the Range, people will read, let's read Riders of the Purple Sage or something like that. And they go, hey, this book's great. It's 100 years old. It's great. I would encourage people to read more classic books because they're not as hard to read as we're told. There's some that are just gripping stories, like The Red Badge of Courage, or many others. Blue Hotel by Stephen Crane, also by Stephen Crane. But anyway, number 5. Have you ever bragged about reading a classic in order to sound smart? I can't remember an incident where I've done that. But it's probably something I've done. I've read a lot of classics, not as many as a lot of other people, but so I may have done it at some point. Or I may have bragged about reading a classic in order to try and get someone else to read it if it's a book I like. So I don't know if I've ever done it to try and sound smart. Where I grew up, it was kind of not good to sound smart. So it's probably something I wouldn't do growing up. And then after growing up, why would I ever put that much energy into anything? I can't imagine trying to impress a girl or something by doing that, but maybe I have. It doesn't sound out of the realm of possibility, is what I'm saying. Okay, do audiobooks count as reading? What about comic books or graphic novels? Comic books and graphic novels, they do count as reading. You do read them. Sometimes, frankly, as I get older, I don't read the words anymore. I've started to read a few comics over the last few years because I've discovered through the Hoopla app that there's a lot of stuff available. And I follow some channels where they talk about comics. It gets me excited about them. I find the dialogue so stupid sometimes, like the Stanley type dialogue, so corny and stupid. Like right now I'm reading the collections of the early Amazing Spider-Man, the first 40 issues. It's 4 volumes of Masterworks. And the dialogue is so cringy that I just look at the pictures. I love the Steve Ditko art, and I'll read some of the dialogue enough to catch up with the story, but so maybe I'm not reading them anymore. Maybe I'm just looking at the pictures, or maybe I'm reading them as pictographs. Just something to think about. They are definitely reading. Audiobooks are not reading because people say they're not. That's not a snob thing on my part. I think there was an audiobook tag sometime. I do have a lot to say about audiobooks. I'm fine with people saying that it's not reading to listen to an audiobook. If people ask me if I've read a book and I've only heard the audio, if you say, have you read, can't think of one that I've just done on audio, but if somebody say, have you read X, and I say, I listened to the audio book of it. It is a different experience. For example, when I was working, I used to read, I used to listen to a lot of audiobooks, and I'd pick big ones that I would have trouble getting hold of or getting to. Like, for example, I read the William Shearer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, which I probably would have never got through if I just didn't have it on my headphone. I think it's about like 30-hour book, at least 20-hour audiobook. And the difference in reading a book and an audiobook in nonfiction definitely is you're not going to go back as much and check things and reread things as I would in a actual print book. So I would say on that hand, you're not really absorbing as much of the book through audio. What I will do most of the time, and I've actually been listening to some audiobooks. See how I almost keep saying reading for listening. What I'll often do is I'll listen to an audiobook of a book that I've previously read. For example, like P.G. Wodehouse or the Parker novels by Donald Westlake as Richard Stark. I listened to all of those again last year. That way I don't care if I miss stuff, because it is easy to zone out on an audiobook sometimes, especially the way I do it when I'm walking and my mind wanders a lot. My mind wanders a lot when I read too, but then I just go back a few pages and catch up, but I really don't do that much on the audiobooks. So it'll be a book where I really like the voice or something like that. But recently I have been reading a series that I'll talk about later. I'll probably do a whole video on it, on audiobook that I had not previously read. And I thought about, I think I grabbed it because I wasn't in a good frame of mind for reading a few months ago, but I was taking a lot of walks, so I thought, no, this would be a good thing to have in the background. And later I thought, I'll read some of the others, but then I thought, well, I've already started this series on audio, and it's got one narrator all the way through. It's about a 20-book series. Not really important for this conversation, but I did like the reader, so I felt like for consistency's sake, I'll read it. I'll listen to the whole thing in his voice, because it is a different thing in that no matter how much I want to read the book, if the voice of the audio, if the narrator, if I can't stand the voice of the narrator, I will not listen to the audiobook. So I never have that problem with my own reading. It's never going to be like, oh, I don't want to have the sound of this book in my head, so I'm not going to read it. But there are many series I've wanted to listen to on audio where I just can't stand the narrator. It just gives me douche chills. There's some really bad audiobook readers out there, and there's some really tedious ones. Probably the only one that I read that was dull, or that I stuck with that was dull, was one of the first audiobooks I ever read, which was The Handmaid's Tale, where the voice was really mopey and drony and dreary and lacking in any kind of forward narrative drive, which really fit the main character. She may be different. The main character's voice may be different in the TV series The Handmaid's Tale. So kind of really fit that the narration was really passive and mopey and dreary. So it might have been a choice on the narrator's part, but there's like LibriVox recordings, really horrible, unprofessional recordings by people that are just impossible to listen to. So the most important thing when it comes to audiobooks is the narrator's voice, and for that reason, I don't consider audiobooks reading, because the most important part, I'll say, kind of working through it in my head, the most important part, again, of the audiobook for me is how the narrator sounds, if it's a good narrator or a bad narrator. Therefore, by definition, I'm not the reader. But I don't look down on people who listen to audiobooks. Maybe they're not bothered by the tone of rhetoric. I've even heard people who do, they'll use those apps where you can have the auto reader read your Kindle book in the robot voice. Call me Ishmael, blah, 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 blah. Well, I don't know why anybody would read that. I think the only reason to use those kind of reader software things is to proofread something, so that you can hear it yourself if it's something you've written a paper or something, to see where there are obviously grammar mistakes that you're missing. But so for me, audiobook is a version of a play or a radio play or something like that, even if it's just a one-person performance. Think of there's a recording of Patrick Stewart's one-man show of A Christmas Carol, which is not a reading of A Christmas Carol. I mean, it's adapted into a stage play, and then he did a recording of it, so he's acting all the voices and stuff, which is great to listen to. It's I'm not counting on his audiobook. It's really more akin to a radio play. But he has to be it has to be an actor you'd want to listen to for 2 hours to that. And I do the same standard for audiobooks. So for that reason, I would consider it not reading for me. But I don't look down on somebody who just does audiobooks, because people have really time issues in life. Excuse me. They want to experience books, but they don't have time to sit there, or they have very distracting lives, and their houses are they can't find the privacy to read for very long. So it definitely doesn't. It's not a snob issue with me, and I really don't care if people count it as reading. If somebody told me they read Moby Dick, and then I would ask if they liked it, and then if they said, well, the narrator was bad, I would say maybe try a different narrator or read it again yourself, but I would not say, oh, you said you read it, and now you're telling me you listened to it, you're a liar. Who cares? If people call it reading, that's fine. If you've got a Booktube channel, which is just all books that you listen to on audio, what difference does that make to me? So I don't have any snobbery around that issue. Anyway, 7. Have you ever looked down at someone for reading a popular fluff book, a book with little substance to it, for example, a self-help book or a celebrity memoir? No, I think that's kind of funny. Sometimes, let me skip ahead here. Maybe I would look down on someone if they only read a certain type of book. Or I would not be impressed if someone only read like all the self-help books. I might feel a little sorry for them, or I guess when it comes to not people I know, but for example, channels. You see I'll see a channel of someone I don't follow, but it'll come up where it says 5 books every man should read, and it's all like Mark Manson, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, Ryan Stoic, the Stoicism of the Stoics. It's like, it's Art of the Deal. It'll be the dumbest, most obvious, or the Black Swan. It'll be like the most anodyne, generic, well-known. Sometimes they'll throw Sapiens in there. It's always like the five trendy books. Now we're out of the Malcolm Gladwell era. It would have been those kind of books 10 years ago. If someone's got a channel like that, then I write them off. It's like ridiculous. 5 books every man should read, or everybody should read, and it's 5 books from the last 5 years. That's just nonsense. But that's not really reading. Those are people doing that for their channel. They pick the same 5 books as everybody else. If someone's reading a book like that, no, I've read some of those books myself too, because I'm just curious about them. I'm curious about what's going on, and there was a while when I was trying to find the trashiest celebrity memoirs I could in the 70s. I read these Elvis tell-all books and stuff like that, because they're just kind of funny to read for a while. Then you get tired of it. But just the self-help books, I would worry about them for a while, because after you've read a few, you realize they're all the same. It's all repackaged, folded over. You're not going to find any new stuff in a self-help book. So I would encourage them to read. If someone's just reading self-help, I would say then definitely read the classics. Read Dostoevsky. Read Middlemarch, or read Edith Wharton. Read any 19th century novel of manners and generations and those kind of things, because that'll teach you more about the human condition than you're ever going to get from self-help books. That'll teach you, because in the 19th century especially, they were concerned, those British novelists especially, We're concerned with marriages, with life and death, with inheritances, with property management, with laws that were coming in England that were changing everything. That's going to teach you what you need to navigate your career and all that kind of stuff. Much better than any kind of drippy self-help book from today, you know. And same with Dostoevsky and all that. I really think that the cure for self-help books is to read classics, 19th century novels, where you're with a character for a long time through their whole life, and you can see how they handled and mishandled their problems. So that, I guess, is one area where I would say, fuck the new books, read the classics, is in the self-help era. Or you could just read the first two self-help books, How to Win Friends and Influence People, Think and Grow Rich. I mean, The Art of Money Getting by P.T. Barnum. These books are like 50 pages long, 100 pages long. It's got all the same stuff because all these modern gurus just go back to those books, which had already figured out all the self-help techniques, all the salesman techniques, all the, look your prospective buyer in the eye, repeat his name back to him so you'll know he's your friend. Because the most glorious sounding word in any language is a person hearing their own name back to them. So that's all you need. So the new ones are just junk. You could read like a couple of them. Sure, read a couple of everything. But if you're hooked on self-help books, you need help, and you're not going to get it from self-help books. So I guess I'm a snob in that manner. But again, if they read only that, then I might look down on them. Okay, have you ever been a recipient of someone else's snobbery? Of course, obviously, many times, because I read classics and because I'll read anything. And once a person paid me that compliment saying, what I like about you is you'll read anything. Because I was reading these Donald Goines movies that I had, Donald Goines books that I had to go to a specialty bookstore to get when they were printed by a small press and they were falling apart. And Donald Goines is a great writer, great. Really fast, hacky pulp writer of African-American novels set in L.A., or were they set in L.A.? It's been a long time now. But they used to be hard to get. Now they're kind of like rediscovered classics. He died really young. He was shot by some drug dealers. Anyway, but they had very garish covers, very amateurishly drawn covers. Now they have better covers. They got picked up by a regular publisher in the 90s. So constantly a recipient of someone else's snobbery, either before or by, of course, when I was a kid, I grew up in a place where reading was not really approved of, especially for boys. It was just gay. Why are you reading a book? Are you gay? That was the kind of level of mentality of people in my high school. There were a few of us who read. Sometimes most people just read those like car repair manuals, things like that. Anything else would just be gay. So there was that kind of snobbery. There's like, that's kind of a certain kind of snobbery too. Like, also there was a thing from older people not wanting you to read above your level. Like, oh, you're not going to be able to handle this book. You shouldn't read it because it's going to put you off reading. And the other kind of snobbery is I read a lot of Edgar Rice Burroughs novels, Tarzan novels, and the Pellucidar novels especially had these really garish Frank Frazetta covers with girls' butts on them and stuff, and people would make fun of me for that. And my parents were a little uncomfortable with it, thinking the books might be too, But then I think my mom read a couple, and she could see how vanilla the Edgar Rice Burroughs books were. They were not erotic sword and sorcery books or anything, but the covers at that time paperback covers were very garish. There was these Mickey Spillane books, which I was not allowed to read at the time. They just had nude women on the covers, and they would just be like the title would be across. There's a book called The Erection Set by Mickey Spillane, which I still haven't read. But it was the most lascivious cover. It was like a naked blonde woman, and the title of The Erection Set was like a small box that just barely covered her nipples, and then she's lying on her back with her legs up the side of the thing, and Mickey Spillane. So I was not allowed to read those books because they seemed to be adult books. Although from the Mickey Spillane I've read recently, it's not really anything. It's more like the violence. If you want to keep your kids away from violence, then you might want to not have them read those books. But they're not sex books. But again, that's back to reverse snobbery. I was also had this girlfriend once who, for a short time, and when I could tell you enough stories to make it clear why it was such a short time. But one thing was, I was reading, it was around Christmas, and I was reading, and I grabbed A Christmas Carol, because I read it every winter. Every Christmas season I would read A Christmas Carol, and she would like, why would you waste your time reading a children's book? And first of all, it's not a children's book. Just because there's a Muppet movie of it doesn't mean there's a children's book. And even if it was a children's book, there's nothing wrong with reading a children's book. And I read 10 times as much as you read anyway, so anyway, I don't want to get off on her. But she was an example of a book snob, and I find that most book snobs don't read very much because they're looking over their shoulder to see her favorite book was a book she had read in college, which was a book that every woman her age had read in college. The Unbearable Lightness of Being, and it's like, nobody reads that book anymore. You don't read. If that's your favorite book, you don't read. Apologies if that's your favorite book. It's a fairly interesting book. I just don't think it has the staying power of some other books. She also looked down on me reading Jean Le Carré, she thought was trash. So, to her, everything had to be in a certain level. I don't know how I got off on her. She's just a reminder of someone, because she liked to pick fights about books. And usually I don't have that close of a relationship with a snob. So, like I said, it didn't last long. There's always been snobbery. There's always been people. It's like, you're such a smart guy. You should read more substantial things, And I read those, and they think like, why do you waste your time on this trash? Like these Ed McBain books, or oh my God, these Conan novels or whatever. It's like, oh, you should read. I had a teacher once who tried to get me off of Conan to read more substantial things in like 7th grade, and you can read both, is my opinion. You should read trash, and you should read classics. You should know the difference between good writing and bad writing. And as Stephen Donahue makes point in his version of this, and also in many of his videos, that there is no I don't remember how he put it, but good writing is good writing, and the genre doesn't matter. If it's a Victorian novel that no one reads anymore because it's long and boring, that doesn't make it good. Someone might enjoy it, but if it's a science fiction 50-cent paperback from the grocery store in 1950. The writing could be beautiful. If it's Jack Vance or Ursula Le Guin or somebody like that, or Joanna Russ, just brilliantly evocative writers who wrote magical prose. Same with Hammett and same with Chandler. It doesn't matter where it appeared. It doesn't matter what the genre is. It doesn't matter. There's great writing in every genre, and there's bad writing in every genre. I tried to read the shipping news once, and I guess people like her still. Annie Proulx, I think it is Proulx. How do you say it? I read the shipping news. She wrote the story that Brokeback Mountain was based on, which I think is what she's more famous for, but I couldn't believe people liked reading the shipping news. I thought it was the most flat, dull prose, uninteresting prose that anybody could ever write. But then you have Ann Tyler, who writes the same kind of book, more or less. Not really, but, the same kind of genre of serious literature, contemporary fiction of about modern people. And Ann Tyler's writing is just fantastic. I don't know why people like Annie Proulx. And where you have writers, and this is more common these days. People used to do this more. They used to do pen names for their mystery novels, or somebody like Gore Vidal has his serious novels. He has his serious historical novels. He has his serious contemporary novels. He had his nonfiction books, but he also had a series of mysteries under the title Edgar Box, I think it was, and he put them in under another name because he wasn't, was somehow looked down upon. But I don't really think that happens anymore. You have like Larry McMurtry, who wrote all these contemporary sad novels about the modern West, like Horsemen Pass By and Last Picture Show. Then when he started writing these westerns, which were, Lonesome Dove and those, and some others like Anything for Billy, they were all under his name, and there wasn't that snobbery that used to exist between doing genre books, entertaining books, and novels of character, which is what I usually try and call literary books. I think that's the main difference. It really, I'm sure people can quibble with that, but like a genre book is a book where there's a crime is at the center or something, and where they're more plot driven. A literary book might be where people are all just hanging out and fighting about their lives, but whatever. I'm getting off topic here. Okay, so obviously there's been someone else's snobbery. Everybody who reads a lot of books has, unless they're reading only the most erudite things. Number 9, would you ever be friends with a snob? Well, I have been. I wouldn't seek them out, but there are people that... I remember one friend I had who thought of herself as a reader, who looked down at another friend of ours who was reading this book called Kinflix, which I haven't read, but it's like one of those 70s kind of quote-unquote big sexy book. I have no idea if that's just the cover it was. It's like a woman's legs on the cover. I think it's called Kinflix. And our friend, how do I tell the story without saying any names? Our friend was like, "Why are you reading that? It looks like trash." And my other friend, who reads more, like I did, she was like, Mary, I'll say, she's actually basing that just on the cover. And we were both like, well, yeah, she doesn't read enough to know that books come out, especially old paperbacks come out with all kinds of covers, trying to appeal to all different kind of audiences, and people who are snobs have evidently never heard the term "don't judge a book by its cover." And you can judge a book by its cover, but you really have to understand covers. A fun thing you can do is go Google Fahrenheit 451 covers and look at all the different covers all through time of that Ray Bradbury novel, Fahrenheit 451. There's covers that are abstract. There's covers that make it like a young adult novel. There's covers that are movie tie-ins. There's covers that make it look like a Space Marine novel. There's any kind of cover you can imagine Fahrenheit 451 because they're trying to appeal to different audiences. It's very educational. You can find that in a lot of books that have been around for a long time. They start out, especially when paperbacks came out in the first ones, the first pocket paperbacks came out in the 50s. They put these garish covers on these old classics. It's very funny to watch, to look at sometimes. Anyway, number 10, are people, I apologize for the length of this, but whatever. I really shouldn't apologize to you, because if you're still here, you must find it interesting. I should have apologized at the beginning. Of course, I didn't know how long it would be. Anyway, number 10, are people who don't read less sophisticated than people who do? Well, it's unfortunate that most people aren't watching this far, because this is where I come out as a true book snob, despite of everything I've said before. Because of this word sophisticated, I have to be honest here. There's no reason to do this if I'm not going to be honest. Are people who don't read less sophisticated than people who do? My answer is yes. Yes, they are. If it was, are people who don't read less moral than people who do? I would say no. Are people who read less intelligent than people do? I would say no. Are people who don't read less nice than people who do? I would say no. But sophisticated, to me, I would have to say, I think a person who reads is more sophisticated than a person who doesn't. I'm just being honest. If you read anything, you're more sophisticated than a person who doesn't read. I'm trying to think of how a person could be sophisticated in the 21st century after how many millennia from the invention of writing, and how many hundreds of years from the invention of the printed book, how a person who doesn't read books could be considered sophisticated. They could be wise, they could be intelligent, they could be crafty, they could be ambitious, they could be many things, but if you're not reading books, I just think you're leaving a lot on the table. So I would encourage everybody to read books. Obviously, nobody's watching this if they're not a reader, but how could you be sophisticated? I don't even understand how this is a question. How could you be more sophisticated? How could a non-reader be more sophisticated than a person who reads? Now, that's not to say that everybody who reads is automatically sophisticated, no. But come on, I mean, how else are you gaining your sophistication? Are you Plato? Are you listening to Socrates? Day in and day out, listening to all his lectures and asking him questions? Of course not. People don't do that. The only way to become sophisticated is to interact with the greatest minds. And how are you going to do that without books? Unless you're, I don't know, the son of, let's say you're Barron Trump or Hunter Biden, and you get to meet all the greatest, you get to meet all the business leaders and all the generals and all the great movers and shakers of the world, and you ask them a lot of questions and you spend a lot of time alone with them, then maybe you could become sophisticated like Hunter Biden or Barron Trump. But for the most part, you're leaving so much on the table if you don't read, that it really makes no sense to me. Unfortunately, it took me so long to get to this question, because it's really the only one that I think is really worth talking about. I mean, the one, I shouldn't say, they're all worth talking about, but the only one that really made me think is this one: are people who don't read less sophisticated than people who do? I just don't see how they cannot be more sophisticated or as sophisticated. But again, they could be intelligent, they could be smarter than anybody. They could be a person you'd want to listen to, but sophisticated, you need the experience of other people's minds to do that, and I don't see how you would get it in this world that we live in, this massive world of 8 billion people. How are you ever going to get access to that without reading books? Or without reading even, because it says just don't read. Anyway, so number 11, measure yourself based on your answers to previous questions. Would you qualify as a snob? Well, I would have to say yes, because I am really adamant about question number 10. So I would say let's say I'm 20% snob, because I'm so adamant on that one, but that's only 1 out of 10 questions, so I'm pretty snobby. And then tag some people. I'm going to tag, let's see, who am I going to tag? Well, I'll probably tag some people. Consider yourself tagged if you haven't done it. I almost don't want to put anybody's name in this tag either, because then they're going to feel like they have to watch the whole thing in case I mention them. But a lot of people have done it already, but I'm going to not put this up for a few days, so maybe I'll put some tape on the tags. I enjoyed doing this very much. I apologize for the length again. I don't know why, because I'm apologizing, because I guess I'm apologizing to myself, because I really wanted to just talk about question number 10, so I probably should have just done that as its own video. But I didn't, and we'll talk soon. Thanks, YouTube.